I'd be remiss if I didn't start off with a little bit of educational humor. But the Senate did their homework and got it right when they decisively supported correcting pupil weights in accord with the UVM Rutgers report's recommendation. They relied on the evidence and expertise of Dr. Kolb and others who were tasked with creating this report. An evidence-based approach that achieves equity for districts is a win for all Vermonters and is consistent with our most important values. The Senate also recognized that using the current system based on pupil weights is a model that school boards are both familiar with and understand, a far more pragmatic means of addressing the legally problematic status quo. As chair of a small rural school district, I urge the House Ways and Means Committee to reject the cost equity proposal. High-need and low-income districts across the state should be trusted to make the same spending decisions as wealthy communities who have benefited from being overweighted in education finance for decades. Most alarming of the cost equity proposal, though, is the potentially anti-democratic features of that proposal. This system would undermine the concept of local control and would effectively create two classes of Vermont school districts: those that bear the stigma and inflexibility of being quote-unquote subsidized, namely because of their income or demographics, and those who do not. This model does not account for regional variances in cost, and by providing grant amounts equivalent to the average additional spending needed for each cost factor, virtually assures that the cycle of disparity in the existing system will carry on, with some districts receiving more or less than what they need or are entitled to under the law. This could also create new and potentially detrimental challenges for some districts. Providing aid under cost equity instead of addressing taxing capacity will allow the same districts who have the current capacity and flexibility to continue having such, while less affluent communities or those with higher needs will be locked into a perception or reality of dependency on state funds and limited choices in their spending. Optics matter to voters, and pushing forward cost equity would be a message to voters in towns like mine of Cabot that they cannot be trusted to make the right decision with education fund dollars. There seems to be an incorrect notion that districts that are presently underweight will not take advantage of taxing capacity to invest in educational quality. Ultimately, can we not be trusted because our taxing capacity is low? I don't think that's an answer the legislature wants to say yes to. Instead, we have the once-in-a-generation opportunity to improve education finance in Vermont. We can ensure the spirit and intent of the Brigham decision, just turning 25 years old, is maintained both in law and in fact for Vermont school districts. The adjustments to education payments proposed under cost equity will be susceptible to political pressures, adjustments, or agency of education rulemaking that will create an uneven playing field in terms of how small and large school districts are able to allocate resources. While the notion of an equalized pupil may be challenging and abstract for some, the underlying and fundamental concept that we have to quantify both student population and student need is essential when we talk about equitably allocating our ed fund resources across the state. Ultimately, cost equity bears the risk of being less transparent and carries the risk that future legislators will attach strings or a hostile administration, agency of education, or state board of education will restrict and dictate how funds are used. This, whether perception or reality, would create two classes of schools. Those receiving categorical aid under cost equity would have to play by a different set of rules than those who do not. This is anathema to the fundamental concept of what equity is and its definition. We cannot limit the expression of equity to raw dollars. Rather, true equity entails entrusting school boards to make the right decisions irrespective of the income level or student need in their community. I urge House Ways and Means to adopt and advance the Senate bill to the full House for vote. We must ensure our core values on equity and opportunity are made a reality so that students across the state have the ability to build our workforce, sustain our communities, large and small, and that every student has an opportunity to succeed here in the state of Vermont. As I noted, I'll be joined by other speakers from the coalition. Just to go through once again, I'll be joined by Martine Gulick of Burlington, Richard Werner, and Alexander Yin. So first, I'd like to have Martine step forward. Martine is a Burlington resident, a retired educator, and is a current Burlington School Commissioner.
Thank you, Rory. Thank you so much, Rory, and thanks everyone for being here and listening to us speak today. This is such an important issue. I come here as someone with multiple lenses. I grew up in Chittenden County in South Burlington. I've worked in districts such as Woodstock, Grand Isle, Essex, South Burlington, and I live in Burlington, and I'm a school board member in Burlington. So it's a known secret to those of us who work in education that there are haves and have-nots in Vermont's education system. And it's clear that some districts have more resources to spare than others. Even within a few miles proximity, you can see vast differences in resources. A former colleague of mine moved from one district to another in the next town over and noted that she was doing the work of 2 to 3 people from her former district. As someone who's worked in Vermont districts with relatively low needs and lives in a district with high needs, I was baffled by the discrepancies I saw in funding between various districts. I came to realize that there were library budgets that were 10 times higher than the library budget at Burlington High School, the district where I live. While librarians in Burlington took care of technology integration for their schools, some schools not only had tech integration specialists, but also a well-staffed IT department. Burlington has no IT director and an understaffed IT department. More teachers and administrators, higher pay, more office staff, all of these resources allow a district to run smoothly, create stability, and retain employees, ultimately affecting student outcomes. As you know, the Senate recently passed S.287, a bill to fix these disparities. This legislation uses empirical data to update how students' needs are measured across the state for the purpose of distributing educational funds to school districts. It's the culmination of a study conducted by UVM and by Rutgers in 2019, which confirmed what many of us on the ground level knew or suspected for a long time. Vermont doesn't accurately account for the cost of educating low-income, rural, and multilingual language learners, which means that our communities are forced to fill in the gaps on the backs of a typically low-income property tax base. The report's recommendations are clear: implement the weights. The Senate should be commended by the bill they've created. Not only have they recognized the varying needs across Vermont and identified the solution preferred by our high needs districts, they were able to create a hybrid approach to multi-language learning funding that suits the needs of both large and small EL districts. Implementing what is being called a cost equity proposal would send the exact same cost adjustment payment to every district for every learner they educate without a certain category of needs, such as low income or rural. Within a certain category of needs, such as low income or rural. This not only circumvents community budgeting decisions, it bakes in the current inequities by using current average spending as a measure. Burlington, as many of you know, is a refugee resettlement community, and we have many English language learners in our district. We are a district with over 50% of our students, where 50% of our students have free and reduced lunch eligibility, with some of our schools as high as 71%. Our needs are great. I've said this many times. Implementing the student weights would allow us and other districts across the state to finally offer our children and our communities the equitable opportunities that they deserve. My last little paragraph here is a quote from a friend of mine and a UVM faculty member named Larry Rudiger. He says, "For decades, educating and supporting the success of school-age new Americans has been a responsibility and an opportunity. This is a big part of the history of Vermont, and it's reflected in the cultural fabric of our state. When it comes to the benefits of effective EL education, we know what works. Supporting these students' English language learning is, simply put, expensive, and it requires a tailored approach for each student, literally where they live. It is an investment that can pay off for many generations." Thank you so much. And Alex, are you next? Not sure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. As I did on February 23rd, 2021, when we started on this journey, I speak to you as a fellow Vermonter. No doubt we are a tough bunch of people, and there is one thing that I learned about us. we all care about equity for all students. When designing a system, the easy part is designing it to be equitable for now. The goal, though, is to design a system that is not only equitable for now, but also equitable for the long term. At this moment, I want to say thank you to the Senate Finance and Education Committee for working collaboratively with the Coalition for Vermont Student Equity in creating S.287. For those that think this was a walk in the park, I will have to disagree with you respectively. Instead, it was a partnership where both sides learned to respect and learn to respect and listen to each other because we had a common goal: to fix an inequitable education funding system. I speak to you as a Vermonter, but I know not all of our experiences are the same. Yes, mine are influenced in my role on the school board for Winooski. I'm also informed through the work my work at UVM and my academic educational background in electrical engineering, statistics, and education. More importantly, I am humble enough to listen and learn from my coalition members and other legislators' experiences. In reflecting back, we learned that there's not one way to solve the problem, and that we cannot just rely on analysis that confirms our own biases. Instead, we need to lean into the diversity of expertise and experiences at the table so that we can create a more just and inclusive system. Because S.287 is a bill that was crafted for Vermonters and by Vermonters. I am now here to ask the House to follow the lead, because I am here for those who cannot. Those who do not have the time to argue for the simplicity of understanding tax rates, because all they want is equity for their children in their school district. And please know, I've been explaining that tax rate to my diverse community for the past 6 years, and they understand it. I'm here because I need the House to listen to the Vermonters. To propose another system that is not vetted means not updating a funding system which was identified to be inequitable in 2019. To only take selected comments from Dr. Colby's memo without taking into consideration the fine print is asking for failure. Sadly, this also means another year of students suffering. No one loves budgeting season, but truthfully, it is an opportunity to unite communities. Yet our current funding formula is doing the opposite in Winooski. I know it has done the same to other underfunded communities. I've been with CVTSE for the past 2 years now, and I greatly appreciate, what I greatly appreciate about this group is that our goal has always been to fight for all Vermont students. There have been times that members could have dropped out because their town needs were going to be met with certain proposed solutions, yet they did not. The urban and rural school districts stood alongside because we understood an inequity for one is inequity for all. We stand united because we believe in equity for all. This is the Vermont I want. This is the Vermont we need. We are calling on the Vermont House to support S.287 with a shorter transition period of no more than 3 years. This is the time to set your ego aside and build the Vermont we can all be proud of. Thank you, and I'm going to pass it on to Rory.
I have to tell you, the other three speakers, I have never heard them speak before, but you guys are very passionate. You did an excellent job, and I almost feel like I should have gone first, so we could have gone from mediocre. But my name is Rich Werner, and I'm here to urge the House lawmakers to fix the broken school funding system. I have for the past 20 years, there's been improper weighting of students in the funding formula, and has resulted in serious hardships for many of the rural communities. So I'm not new to this issue. I've been in a unique perspective because I've been at firsthand experience with being with school funding as a school board chair, serving since the mid-1990s. So I was there before Act 60, through Act 60, into Act 68, and now. And still today is chair of the River Valley School District and also chair of the Windham Central Supervisory Union at Windham Central for almost 20 years. I really got to understand the school funding, education funding system. Brad James, I used to call him and say, "What do you want now?" So I've been calling Brad for a lot of years. Bill Talbot, one day I was at a restaurant talking about education funding. This gentleman walked up to me and said, "You must be Rich Werner." And he said, "How'd you know that?" He says, my name is Bill Talbot, and I've been talking to you on the phone for a while. And I heard you discussing education funding. In the early days of Act 60, the legislature recognized that small and rural schools had additional challenges, as well as students from high poverty areas and English language learners. To correct these, there were several adjustments made early on, some through weighting and some through grants. A few years into the weighting grants, there had been some adjustments, and then it seemed to stagnate. We had no more adjustments. As a result, many of the smaller rural and high poverty areas have been severely underfunded for a number of years. I've attended many school board meetings, not only in our supervisory union and for our district, but for neighboring districts, and have seen how they really struggle. As the gentleman said, budgeting time is not a fun time. And there's very difficult decisions to be made. Issues with budget increases that are above the board's control from outside sources, how much money we're going to get, and it becomes very difficult for the boards to do that. And this is throughout Windham County and throughout the state, as we've heard from other speakers today. Although the town of Dover will actually adversely be affected when the weights are adjusted, it is important these changes are made as it affects our most vulnerable students who live in our rural areas, which make up a large percentage of our students, and those students that are suffering through poverty and are learning to speak English. I would like to make it clear that while we are all open to new ways to do things, this is not the time to experiment with new school funding system. Now is the time to end the unfairness by fixing the pupil weighting and continue with the system we all know and have used for a number of years. In my view, the Senate-passed bill is on the right track, with a little caveat that the corrections to the weights, but it should be implemented in a more quick, in 3 years instead of 5 years, along with transitional funding. And we have experience with that. That's how Act 60 was transitioned in 3 years, and there was transitional funding. We knew that worked. We should know that this works. So I'd like to really thank everybody for allowing me to address you, and hopefully we'll get our bill passed.
Thank you very much to our fellow speakers, and I think what's most impressive, and I agree with the sentiment, I'm a relatively new entrant of only 5 years of service on a school board. When looking around the coalition to see the expertise and knowledge of communities and education finance, it's been impressive and a wonderful experience to work with so many who are committed to improving education. With that said, I open it up for any questions for any of the speakers or others. As well known, Cabot has suffered for years of budget tumult ever since the Act 46 process sort of opened up a broader conversation and also pushed us in the direction of Australian ballot voting as opposed to a town meeting format. We have two camps. There's some folks in town who feel we're not spending enough on education, or that educational quality doesn't meet up with what we're spending. And then there's another camp that just feels, well, as many of us have probably heard in communities, it's just too darn expensive. You know, I think I will say as a board chair and looking at the composition of our board, we see acutely need for more spending. The problem is, at the end of the day, many of our voters are looking at what is our per pupil spending, and so long as that's divided by an incorrect number of equalized pupils, we're going to continue to look high, namely because of the extra resources we're putting in to deal with our rural poverty, with our significantly above average population of students on IEPs or have additional needs. The story bears out in many other communities. Some communities have many English language learners. Others also share in the double whammy of poverty and student need and reduced taxing capacity. At the end of the day, though, it shouldn't be a make or break situation when we're talking about spending $40,000 to $50,000 to replace a playground that's condemned. These are things that every school should have and every child should have access to. So I think the concern or fear that districts are going to take the money and run, or just realize tax savings, doesn't meet the reality on the ground, that many of these school districts are struggling to meet basic needs. And what we're asking for is a level playing field so we can provide some of those services, whether it's additional opportunities through library, whether it's additional foreign language, these things that are really setting up students for success, whether they go on to college or onto a vocation. This is what schools from districts as large as Burlington to as small as Peacham and Cabot really need in order to succeed. And ultimately, I think the spirit of Brigham said, point blank, the opportunities a child has shouldn't be based upon what zip code they're in, whether they merged with another larger district, or what part of the state they're in. We have a system that in theory should work to serve all students equitably, and we need to make sure with this opportunity we do so.
Can I just add on, because I am in the Winooski School District where we've been having to fight to get the inequities kind of like fight and dealing with these budget constraints. I was somehow able to work with our school board to pass with our town a $57.8 million bond vote so that we could build a new building because our basically system of catching rain was buckets in the building. How can we actually have students live in a building and learn when the building wasn't really suitable for them? And in many ways, the arguments that we focus on just taxing capacity is also wrong because all of our school board members and legislators know that it's about investment in our schools because it means it's the health of our long-term communities. I've noticed that we also look at outcomes such as how well are they doing in school, and I would appreciate that Rory mentioned it's about the student learning outcomes, but it's also about whether our students feel that our community cares about them, right? And if our community does not feel that if our students do not feel that our communities care about them, then why would they stay in the districts after they grow out of the district? We ask ourselves, why are people leaving Vermont? Well, maybe it's because we aren't having an equitable system to keep the communities whole. And I purposely look at the youth and behavior of things to see those numbers. Those are the arguments that we make when we want to pass the school budget. It isn't just strictly $1 and not seen as a cost to our students because our children are in an investment. And all the school districts here are asking for that same opportunity that other schools have had in the last 27 years, that same opportunity to grow our community so that we have multi-generations in it because that's what it means to be a healthy community. You're welcome.
Any other questions from those in attendance? Okay. Well, hearing and seeing none, I really appreciate the coalition members coming out, and it is great to see so many legislators here supporting. I know you're representing the best wishes and intentions of your districts and really the welfare of Vermont's children. Education is foundational to what makes Vermont special and exceptional when we look at other states. I hope that the House will act appropriately and pass S.287, again, with a shorter timeline for implementation. We can't wait much longer, and the future is right in front of us.